Hello, I'm Nicole Anderson, and thank you for joining us for our Equity Roundtable discussion. I am so thrilled to be joined by our Equity Committee representatives, Sonja Lowery, Bianchi, and Edgar Lampkin. And today we will talk about all things equity. So share with me one or two best practices in relation to how you initiate difficult conversations with your staff. In particular, think about how you handle resistors, also known as fundamentalists, when trying to lead this equity movement in your particular realm of work.
You know, we were talking a little bit earlier about this inside-outside approach to do this work and having that internal self-reflection to begin with knowing who you are. What is your cultural identity? What is your affiliation? Do you have power in our system? Are you from the dominant culture? You know, those are all the questions, you know, with respect to the system that we live in and have created. And it's really a lot about, you know, who has privilege and who does not, who are targets and who are agents in our system. And I think that the adults in an education system really play that all out, but in the end, it really affects our kids the most. And so, you know, what I would consider with regard to dealing with resistors, as we might call them, is what is it about the work that we can help to create a sense of moral purpose? It's really about trying to develop the why for them and build that frame so that they feel a sense of urgency. Because at the end of the day, we need people to buy into the work, to really want to do the work. It's not about pushing it up in somebody's face and being combative, because that is what turns people away. That's what makes people feel like equity is just an initiative and we're just talking about this temporarily for the time being, and you just want me to work this program, versus challenging what we value, right? So when I say, you know, helping people understand what the moral purpose is, that's putting a face to the data. Like, that's a kid's life, right? We work in a system where we don't produce widgets, we don't produce nuts and bolts, right? We are not a manufacturing plant. What we do every day is critical because it affects someone's life, right, at the end of the day. And so if we want our folks to have passion, we have to create that sense of urgency and that moral purpose. And so we do that by modeling. We do that by challenging the status quo. We do that by having individual conversations. So if I'm a site leader, and I know that I have a few folks on my campus that are saying things that are disrespectful to kids, and I know that they carry bias, I am not going to affect change in that person in an open staff meeting, right? But I can enlist a buddy to have private conversations with that person. I can in turn have private conversations with that person as well. And when something does happen that's public, it needs to be checked, but it needs to be checked in a responsible way. So I think just having those individual conversations, because it's almost like to do this work, you have to inoculate somebody, like you get a shot and then, oh, now I'm a believer, right? It's not like we can just sprinkle magic fairy dust on people. It's those individual conversations in those individual situations that where some kind of discrimination happens, or there's a situation where we know that there is explicit bias. And so when those situations happen, we have to speak up. So.
Yeah, and thinking about bias and fundamentalists, I think, was part of the question. And thinking about, as a leader, approaching and initiating a conversation, my first step is always to check my own bias as far as how I feel about that person, because internally I'm kind of doing an eye roll and going, oh my gosh, how can you not get this, right? And so checking my own bias right there and not setting up an us and them from the get-go, because inside that's kind of how it feels initially, making myself wait until I've got that all in check, and knowing there's, just like you said, we're not producing widgets everybody goes into education with a heart. I have to believe that, with wanting to do good for kids. There might be some exceptions, but as a rule, everybody wants to do well for kids. So I've checked my bias. I'm going to approach this person without the us and them in my brain. I've taken care of that. And I'm going to find that hook. There's that thing within that person that, what made them want to become an educator? What do they really care about? Because there's always that something. So that's just kind of the one-on-one. But I do think that as a system, having education, for example, being at a school where we needed to have some training around kids that are gender non-conforming, we bring in gender spectrum to do some training so that it's out there. And yeah, it's the law, and this is what we need to do. But that doesn't take the place of getting somebody's heart and getting them to really want to do it. But it helps to know, yeah, but we are required to not discriminate. But the heart part is where we as leaders are leading by example, becoming part of the, we're making our learning transparent and our changes in our own bias and putting them out there.
Yeah, I like what you said. You know, that resonated with me in that when we work on the system as a whole, we really want to try to ensure that we're trying to help everyone in our system, you know, be culturally proficient, right? That's that ongoing work. We're just sort of continuing to tap the nail, right? I like that.
Well, having heard what both of you have said, I would say for me it's a couple of strategies that I use. And one of those is it's using 2 of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Keeping first things first, which is what you just said, the moral purpose of what we're trying to do. Then secondly, seeking to understand in order to be understood, which kind of ties to what you were talking about, which has to do with being able to listen, try to understand where the person's coming from, being able to help them know and understand that you're trying to make that connection with them, and then working with them towards that deconstruction of that mindset that might be there. And it's over time. And like I think both of you said that, it has to be with dialogue. And so Paulo Freire talks about critical pedagogy, about a process that we need to go through in order to deconstruct and rename our world and our reality. And so he talks about engaging in dialogue that builds critical consciousness and understanding, and then gives you an opportunity to name whatever that ism might be, so that you can then begin to work towards taking action at deconstructing it. And it's a process, and it's over time.
I think, you know, also that when something happens at a school, you know, where we feel a kid has been wronged, right, or an adult in our system has been disrespected, as a leader, we want to make it right. So I really appreciate you reminding us that it does take time. And I really liked what you were saying about just checking your own internal bias first. You know, that just lends me to believe that none of this is a quick fix, right? And sometimes we have to rest.
I want to thank all of our panelists and thank you for joining us at our Equity Roundtable discussion. We invite you to join us again here at ACSA.org for our next equity discussion, where we tackle the various equity issues around our state.